We've all started something and then quit, and we likely felt pretty guilty about it, right? Sometimes that guilt is quite valid and you shouldn't be giving up just yet, but you've heard all that before. However, there's situations where that isn't the case, where quitting as such could actually be really beneficial for you. And there's a couple characters in Haikyuu that go into this idea in a really interesting way. So I'm going to start with one who hasn't been introduced in the anime so far, but we won't need to go into any actual spoilers for the match. Sachiro Hirugami, the Immovable, stands at a towering 6'3" and is regarded as the cornerstone of one of the strongest blocking teams in the whole nation. He gives Karasuno's ace a hellish time, and even Hinata's freak quick attack doesn't particularly faze him. In chapter 351, we get a look inside his head and at his past. Right after Karasuno's score off of a synchro attack, we see Hirugami laughing about how their attack is annoying. His teammates talk about how nothing seems to faze him at all, but we soon see that this wasn't always the case, and so he responds with, "I guess that's because I learned how to let things go." He talks about how his whole family all went to big name volleyball schools, which the whole situation of parents kind of pushing you down a certain path is an interesting one, because I think the natural assumption a lot of people have is that it's a bad thing and that they're forcing the kid into it. But whilst I can't talk about anything from my own experience, I think it's worth pointing out that there's people out there like Ushiwaka who would definitely disagree with that. So I don't think it's as simple as, yeah, that's bad. But obviously Hirugami is probably an example of it going too far. So he starts playing volleyball at a very young age, and with his height and genetics, he's naturally great at it, right? And most notably, he says that he really enjoys it as well. So he goes straight to the strongest local team's school. Nothing too surprising so far. But then we start to see him training and talking about how he not only wants to get better, he wants all his hits to score, all his serve to score, all of his passes to be on target. There's obviously not a single player alive who can do any one of those things, let alone all three, right? Not even Hoshiumi, who's regarded as a monster at every aspect of the sport. Anyway, when Hirugami gets to go into his first practice match, he relentlessly apologizes for every tiny little mistake. I'm assuming he made quite a lot of mistakes as well, as he ends up getting swapped out for a different player. And so following this match, he vows to never make a mistake, never mess up, never let anyone outdo him, never get left behind. But following training, we see him sadly plodding along, whilst the bright-eyed Hoshiumi trains, seeming to really enjoy himself. The next day, he gets back to it, and we see a very clever little panel where his volleyball books are all but covering his entire photo. That younger, happier version of him has nearly completely been taken over by the very thing that used to bring him so much joy. The seasons pass, and on the surface, it looks as though his hard work is paying off. He wins an award for being an outstanding athlete, but if you look at his eyes, there's no light, let alone joy in them. When we saw him training before, he has this glimmer in his eyes, this excitement for the future. But now he doesn't even look that happy. It's more of a, yeah, this is mine, as I deserved type of look. To me, it seems more as though he'd be devastated if he didn't get it, but actually getting it does very, very little for him, which is a horrid place to be, and as good of a justification as any for what follows. So the next day, he overhears a teammate talking about how he's been struggling lately, that he's having an off day in a slump, to which Hirugami thinks about how he just doesn't agree with that, claiming that there's only one reason you don't get results, and that's because you didn't try hard enough. It's kind of similar to Kita's philosophy. However, I think the key difference here is that Kita saw it as more of a, if I wanted more, I could begin to do these things I see other people do. Whereas Hirugami is more looking at it from an angle of, why didn't you do that? It's your fault, what's wrong with you? He's really beating himself up. So whilst they both have a similar idea of your results equals your actions, obviously one sees it from a far more balanced, optimistic view, and the other sees it from a very unhealthy, critical angle. But I think the other key part here is Keaton never said mistakes wouldn't happen. He said that you shouldn't be nervous, as there's no reason you wouldn't be able to do in a game what you did in practice, but he acknowledges that it doesn't mean everything will go the way you expect. And we see that when he does make a mistake, he's able to quickly move past it. By comparison, Hirugami's fear of making mistakes and expectation for himself that he'd never make any is what seems to have him so flustered and panicking in matches. Going back to his training, in the very next panel we see him say, "I don't like them," referring to his teammates, followed by his eyes looking very, very different to anything we've seen so far. It's as though he didn't like the realization that follows, that yeah, it's pretty weird for someone who doesn't like having teammates to play a team sport. His trail of thoughts is never finished as he goes off to do more serving, seemingly distracting himself from his thoughts. So with the national qualifiers coming up, he reflects on how his defense is still inadequate, to him anyway, and how he needs to make sure he doesn't mess up. However, when they lose the following game, which seems to be in part due to him overanalyzing a bit, he really puts himself down. He's quite relentlessly apologizing to his teammates, who say that there was nothing that could be done. And it's probably true, they're probably right. Again, there isn't a single player in volleyball history who's made every single block. So he reflects on his mistakes, which, that's a fine thing to do, but you should also reflect on the things you did well, and take pride on them. There's a line from Takeda earlier in the series where he talks to Ukai about how it's important to tell the students when they're doing something well, not just badly. I'm sure everyone would agree with that, and if they were talking to someone else, they would do exactly that. But how often do you do that with yourself? Do you say, yeah, I did that well actually, I'm proud of myself for doing that, I did a good job at that? Neither of us do that anywhere near as often as we should, right? And no doubt sometimes we're like Hirugami and just never do that. In fact, it doesn't seem like he's done that once in his entire volleyball career. So we see him walking along, reflecting on his mistakes, and blaming his hands. I suppose in his head he knows what he should be doing. He has this vision, right? But his body just isn't able to match it. Again, not very surprising because he's expecting his body to do everything perfectly every single time. Regardless, he says that he hates his hands as a result, and then starts scraping his knuckles against the wall to make them bleed. Which, correct me if I'm wrong, but besides Kageyama getting a nosebleed after being hit in the face against Jizenji, which was, a pretty unserious scene, I think this is the only time in Haikyuu where we see blood. Right, so before Hoshiumi's reaction to this, what caused him to go from finding volleyball fun to hating himself so much that for making a few mistakes, he would do this to himself? The sport is now the reason he's doing this. So for one, whilst we don't see too much about his early volleyball days, it's probably fair to assume that he didn't see it through the lens of just counting his mistakes the way he does now. So he's got this mental list of, this needs to happen or I can't enjoy it, which already isn't great, but his list is impossible for him to ever obtain. And honestly, I think the other part is, whilst he's clearly extremely good, it's not as though he's overwhelmingly good at it anymore. At first he was likely a very big fish in a very small pond, so he was able to just brush aside his opponents with ease. So, of course he had the confidence that he'd go pro and be a world star. But now he's starting to realize what trying to reach that kind of level is actually like. And he just doesn't like it enough to put all that effort in. So he's putting all this relentless effort in for something which not only does he not enjoy at all, but it doesn't seem like he ever will. And so Hoshiumi just looks at him and says, well, why don't you just quit? It's one of the last lines I would have expected from him. And that's exactly the point. He'd never even considered the idea that he could quit before, that he could stop playing volleyball. The fact that you can stop at any time and still be alright is super relieving. because if you really think you can't stop, then you're effectively a prisoner to it, right? So instead you should be chasing whatever you are because you want to. And you don't even have to stop entirely. You know, if need be for whatever reason, you could stop for a bit. And it's not as though everything you've built up is just going to vanish. You know, in fact, in some cases, it might even do you some good. And so Hirugami says that whilst quitting may raise a set of other problems, presumably this means discussing it with his family, but just knowing he has the option to quit if he wants or needs to made it feel as though the whole world had opened up to him, as though he'd finally found his freedom alongside his fellow seagull, Hoshiumi. Now, I spoke a lot more about this in my video on Mark Snuffy from Blue Lock, which you should check out afterwards if you found this one interesting, but not feeling as though you have any choice but to keep going and put impossible pressure on yourself to never make even the slightest mistake is a great way to stop enjoying whatever it is very, very quickly. Whereas when we return to present day, we see him looking a lot happier, and rather than those dark and empty eyes he had when he was overtraining, or those almost sort of frightened hollow ones he had when he had these realizations he didn't want to accept, his eyes now look perfectly normal. It's fine if he makes a mistake. It's fine if he decides to stop playing volleyball. None of these things will be the end of the world. And funnily enough, on the opposite side of the net, Asahi is going through pretty much the exact same thing, and talks about how his fear of making a mistake caused him to stop enjoying volleyball too. However, he deserves his own separate video. So instead I want to finish the video by briefly talking about a different character, one who's arguably the best player in the series who doesn't continue with volleyball after graduating. And yes, I know there's another contender for that spot, but please don't spoil that in the comments. Anyway, Osamu Miya is clearly an extremely skilled player. Although he wasn't quite selected for the National Youth Camp, it's pretty clear that he's not miles off that level, right? And yet, he decides that he doesn't want to keep playing volleyball after high school. The realization seems to come during his match against Karasuno, where he sees that endless, fiery passion Hinata has for volleyball and realizes that he just doesn't have that. He just doesn't enjoy it as much as others, and more importantly, as much as he loves food. Now, this would not have been an easy decision to make, and this is something I've gone through myself. You know, when you're good at something you decide it's not for you, a lot of people will try and talk you out of it, and they can be very convincing when they do. In particular, of course, his twin Atsumu. And so the two end up deciding to have a competition over who ends up happier, which, okay then, that's the Miya twins for you, I guess. But the point of this video is, it simply wouldn't be right to write him off as a quitter, because there's a huge difference between quitting because you're lazy or scared, and not continuing for something because it's just no longer resourceful to you. This is very clearly the latter. And so I want to share this comment from a viewer, which is one of the best comments I've ever received, which is only quit on a good day. That way you'll know it's not for you. That way you won't spend the rest of your life wondering, oh, what if, or wishing you'd carried it on, because you'll know that that decision wasn't influenced by frustration or a lack of guts. Now, of course, if you're in Hirugami's situation and you've seemingly not had a good day for years, then maybe that doesn't apply. But I think it's a great comment regardless. So, as mentioned in other videos, I do think you should always give everything enough time to get some level of competence at it before quitting, as a big part of the fun of anything is getting good at it. It's also important to note that no matter what it is, it's going to have aspects you don't like as much, and you're going to have times where it isn't quite as fun. But if you've been thinking about it for a while, and you can honestly say to yourself that it's not for you, then maybe it served its purpose. It doesn't mean it was a waste, you know, you don't spend your whole life doing something for it to be worthwhile. For example, Kita's last words before he walks out of that stadium are, "I'm not playing volleyball anymore after high school, so does that mean I'm just going to vanish?" With the answer obviously being no. And that even if he didn't get to win, he got to build up a lot of muscle, which is always great, and now feels like he can take on anything the world throws at him, which all links into my favourite part of Hinata's story about how these kind of situations can benefit you in the oddest way down the line, but I've made 2 videos on that already, so go and check those out if you enjoyed this one. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. You're going to love the collab that's coming out next.